But first, it's my take. Now, the diplomatic tiff between Kenya and Somalia over a contested maritime territory is quite unfortunate. Many have struggled to come to terms with the fact that the Horn of Africa state could contemplate a maritime territorial dispute with Kenya and even drag the latter to the International Court of Justice in 2014. At the center of the row is some 62,000 square meters of Indian Ocean, believed to be rich in oil and gas deposits. Now, even before the ICJ could render that decision that they took Kenya to court, reports emerged that Mogadishu had auctioned or had intended to auction oil and gas blocks in that disputed territory. Now, the predictable thing that Kenya will do at this point is that they could be upset, and indeed they were upset. And in a fit of rage, they sent the Somali ambassador to Mogadishu, that's Hamed Nur, back home while summoning its own General Retired Lucas Tumbo to Nairobi. Though reports that Mogadishu denied the sale deal will go on as long as they have said that, it's a long way in, it comes a long way in cooling the heightened diplomatic temperatures. Now, the aura of suspicion will not dissipate just yet. What was the origin of this report? And if it's true, why was Somalia in a hurry with the auction? If the claims are unfounded, then Kenya must thoroughly interrogate the diplomatic and economic intelligence. Now, the good that Kenya has done to Somalia here is innumerable, and one is inclined to wonder why Mogadishu would want to hurt such a neighbor. When Somali dictator Sidebar fell in 1991, he took refuge right here in the country before the media blew his cover off, forcing him to relocate to Nigeria, where he eventually died in 1995. Now, Kenya will then come in handy when, after years of turmoil and international mediation, the transitional federal government of Somalia was formed in 2004, right here in Nairobi yet again, when it was governed until June of 2005. Now, Kenya is home to thousands of Somalians. We all know that. Generations of which have only known Kenya as their home, from Dadaab camp to right here in Nairobi, and of course the Eastleigh suburb, which hosts thriving Somalian community. The move, or the more enterprising Somalians who have made fortune away from their home, that's the Somalians, live right there in Eastleigh. Now, Kenya has placed itself in the line of fire against Al-Shabaab and has paid hefty price. Hundreds of Kenyan peacekeepers troops, that's under the AMISOM, have been killed defending Mogadishu government, with the most memorable being the El Ade massacre, that's in January of 2016. And of course, there was another attack in January of 2017 when the militants took control of Kulbioi, and that was the base again of the Kenyan military right there. Now, Kenya has on numerous occasions been victims of the terror attacks by the jihadists, claiming tens of innocent lives. The latest was just last month at the 14 Riverside complex right here in Nairobi once again. And the continued friendship between the two countries is mutually benefit to these neighbors. Thus, the leaders of the two countries must seek quick resolution to the dispute before things get out of hand. And tonight we borrow from the words of Dalai Lama, who says we can obtain peace in the outer world until, or we can't obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace within ourselves. And my guest tonight is Bishop David Murithi, Reverend Gowi Odera, Arnold Maliba, and Steve Ogola. My name is Ken Mijungu. Welcome to our program. The hashtag, as always, is Sidebar. Join the conversation, NTV Kenya, that's at NTV Kenya, at Ken Mijungu. Sidebar begins right now.
The government has moral responsibility to ensure that religious organizations perform their work in an environment that is peaceful.
Kanisa si sehemu ya serikali.
We can control the proliferation of panda begu.
Hiyo huwezi kuingilia na kusema ya kwamba watu hawezi kutoa sadaka kwa sababu sadaka ni ibada.
Sheria ni nzuri na ni kwa ajili ya kulinda haki.
Let us not try to pontificate and try and make rules without listening to them.
The necessary adjustments and amendments will be made so that we do not penalize men of God.
All right, let's begin the show. And the obvious question, and I'll begin with Bishop, is to regulate or not to regulate?
Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I haven't seen the bill that is going to be presented to the House, but that is a very, very mega question. I would prefer to have seen the bill, but generally speaking, regulating the church is a difficult thing. Kenya has no state religion like Iran, where it can regulate. And it's so difficult to regulate what you don't fund.
Okay.
So I think that would be my introduction to this subject.
Okay. Reverend, to regulate or not to regulate?
I think we're already regulated.
Self-regulation.
Just to answer your question, to regulate or not,
okay,
we're already regulated under the Societies Act. We as the church and religious societies of different religious faiths are already regulated. And so I know we can expound on this more, but to answer your question, we're already regulated.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me speak to Arnold, who's a governance expert. Arnold, to regulate or not to regulate?
Well, before I actually say whether we are regulating or not, I need first to send this home, that I am a practicing Christian.
Oh yeah, I needed to have mentioned that.
Yeah, I am a
that
practicing
you're a pastor
Christian.
Also, sometimes.
If it weren't for church and a man of God, I would probably not be seated here. The man who gave me my first job is Bishop Arthur Kitonga of Redeemed Gospel Church, where I grew up. But after saying that, I would actually also need to say that I still sit under a pastor who is almost my age, Rigo Kabucho. But I say church needs to be regulated, religion needs to be regulated.
Okay.
And like Bishop said, that you do not regulate what you fund. We fund this government and it regulates us.
Okay. The advocate, same question, to regulate or not to regulate religious sector?
Well, Ken, we have to regulate as a matter of course. That is what the law has required, but I think the better question is to deepen the regulation or not. Because I'm persuaded that we need to deepen regulation for purposes of transparency and accountability in the manner in which our churches are being managed. So that is the inescapable reality. Let the church make peace with that. They must be regulated. They are already being regulated. If you look at the Constitution, the freedom of worship is allowed. But the manner in which you worship and how you articulate your expression of faith is sufficiently curtailed, because the Constitution says, under Article 24, there may be circumstances under which the rights may be limited. Also, as Pastor Goy said, because churches are registered under the Societies Act, it presupposes that you give yourself to some form of state regulation. But then also because the constitutive document, the church constitution, also presupposes some level of internal regulation. But that's not what Kenyans are concerned about. Kenyans are concerned about the level of regulation that is at its weakest form. We must deepen and strengthen accountability of the church so that they are more open, they are more accountable, they are more transparent. That is what is consistent with our constitution. That is what is consistent with our expression of faith.
Okay. To
tell us that we need to operate in a manner that is obscure, I think is going to be counterproductive.
Who's saying that?
I mean, from the clips I've heard, you know,
from the friends from the religious sector.
Yeah. We must deepen regulation.
Okay.
As a matter of practical reality.
Before he goes off, it's important to note that out there, there's a tweet you put up the other day, and we think you are Prophet Awards Adhiara.
I'm a lawyer.
So probably you need to, you are a lawyer.
Okay. Okay. Let's come back and discuss it. Because you have been, they've mentioned, because you say, Reverend here says that you are regulated, right? You agree with regulation. However, it looks as though the church is fighting this deeper regulation that they speak about.
What is the government trying to solve? What is the policy paper they have in place? Because as it has been rightly said, all churches have got internal mechanisms to regulate themselves. All churches are regulated by the Register of Societies.
Okay.
We are accountable to our members. There are structures and systems in every organization. Who regulates the Catholic Church? Mm-hmm. Who regulates the Methodist Church? Who regulates the Pentecostal churches? Mm-hmm. We have EAK. We have got NCCK. So we have systems and structures in place. Do we need to have another law to regulate the church? We have laws that regulate the church as we speak. So do we need to add on top of the laws that we can't even implement as a nation? We have too many laws in this country that are not implemented. We keep on making laws that we don't implement. We have laws that can govern the church as it is today.
Okay.
So do we need to add other laws? And if we need to add other laws, then it has to border on criminality, because we do have laws as far as the Registrar of Society is concerned.
Okay.
I'm thinking the church as is today is honestly not regulated in the strictest sense of the word regulation. And I want to begin from the origin of what government is. Men knew earlier on in life that if they stayed together and gave power to one of them, would actually ensure that they are protected. So the essence, the primary essence why governments exist was about protection of the people. It was about their protection, and then the rule and then order, the law, the rule of law and then order. Later on, in the 19th century, when things started working different, then also the economy came into as a function of government, and also later on we have brought in, besides the economy, we have brought in, I'm losing the other one, but I need to say this, that government primarily exists to protect the people, first of all against each other, and then secondly against external threats. So when, you know, human beings are inherently selfish. So being inherently selfish means that we harm each other. Now I want to use the harm principle. If what the congregation gives is actually used to simply take care of a pastor's lifestyle, then harming the sheep, for example. If the shepherd, who is a pastor, is actually skinning the sheep instead of shearing them, then isn't it allowable that it should be regulated?
Okay.
If religion, for example, is actually putting young people into a place where they get out and kill others. When we talk about radicalization, it's about religion. When we talk about what's happening out here, by the way, there are a few things that the church really needs to come out and actually subject itself to regulation fairly.
We'll talk about those. We'll talk about those.
Ken, I need to point out this. Like, the church has really messed up the land system in this country. We are unable to take care of the land system because the church has actually messed that up. The same thing with education. Guys who've never done anything, like, unlike him who's gone to school, guys just show up from nowhere and they are doctors. So they've bastardized the education system, they've messed up the land system, and it's just a simple thing. A few guys who are doing legit business, like, and by the way, it's not different. Religion is not different because we regulate science. We regulate the...
So your point, Maliba, is about
science.
regulation.
For example, doctors, take care of us.
Your point, yes.
He's making unfounded...
About the church messing up the whole thing, yes.
I think
the Dungu report is not
if this conversation is to go on and to be, to help our listeners understand,
yes,
such far-fetched comments should have some evidence.
Unless you give us an example, yes. Unless you give us an example.
Allow him to retract or to substantiate.
In the report,
yes, churches are mentioned.
He needs to challenge that.
Specifically?
Churches are mentioned as some of the grabbers.
Of the land.
Yes.
Ken, I think
True or false?
The thing is this, let's not have a chaotic expansion of the discussion that
yes.
we're having. This is a very straightforward issue.
Absolutely.
What Kenyans want, and if I capture the emotions right, there is the kind of regulation that is going on which is not satisfactory. I mean, churches are already self-regulating. That's why they have a constitution. It is the constitutive document that brings them together. It promotes what they want to, how their statement of faith, and how they want to conduct their affairs internally. But also, there is also the regulator, the Registrar of Societies, that also has some residual roles in terms of registration. So far, at the very minimum level, we have churches that are not even registered in the first place. I mean, that's a fact.
Did you hear what the president said in 2017?
I mean,
when he lifted the moratorium that was imposed in 2014.
Even that moratorium, he could even have gone back because the discussion was, when I was doing a background check in 1996, there was already a bill, you know, a religious societies bill to try and regulate. The churches killed it.
Let's come back. Let's come back to the discussion here. Let's come back. I'd like to show you.
That needs to be challenged. When he says that
I'll come back to you
into chaos. First of all,
by going away from what Kenyans want.
It's chaotic. You cannot regulate what is not chaotic in the first place.
But that's not the issue.
Yes.
But
let's take a look
about chaos.
Maliba.
The religious sector is more chaotic than the matatu sector.
No,
you can't say that. You can't say that. You can't say that.
Why are we trying to regulate?
It's completely.
It's
What do you
chaos.
regulate?
There's several.
What do you regulate? What is the chaos?
That's not the kind
What
of
is the chaos? What is the chaos?
Yes.
As in, if there was no chaos, why do we want to regulate?
To regulate.
I want to know what you want to regulate.
Yes, the
What do you want to regulate?
Yes.
We are
What is the
regulating
problem?
fraud,
What is the
money
problem? What
laundering.
fraud?
As in,
Don't we have laws for that?
there are a lot
Is
of
that
it.
not criminal?
But then
Yes,
you
that's
can't
criminal.
get-
What is
criminal?
It's
Do you
criminal.
have laws for that?
But then you guys cover up for them.
So do we need to regulate the fraud and criminality?
we need
the
to
laws are
regulate
there.
because they are hiding
The laws are there.
religion.
No, but there are already
we have
existing
laws
laws.
on the matter of terrorism.
Maliba,
The laws are there.
there are
They
laws
are not.
against crime.
When you
Please.
hide
That's not
under
the kind of
religion,
regulation we're talking
Yes,
about.
we are
The
not talking
laws are
about. If there's crime, is there's
really,
fraud.
Exactly.
if they were
That's
effective,
criminal.
we will not be talking about
All right, let's come back. Let's take a look at these graphics. Then we'll come back to the discussion because I want to tell you what the required. First, these are the requirements, the regulating religious organizations, the existing ones first. They must be registered by the government under the Societies Act, and they must file annual returns, plus those of their branches. Marriage must be presided over by only the people who have certificates from the AG, and money should be paid to the county governments before crusades or outdoor meetings. We know that. Let's take a look now the ones they want to enforce apart from this. They're coming up. This is what they want to enforce. They must furnish an umbrella regulatory body with an actual location they intend to operate. Aside from that, details of their leadership who are existing at the time they want to establish, and leadership should not consist of family members. Very contentious, because I like to speak about that, because that's one of the proposals that have been made. And then there must be minimum qualification for one to practice. And let's go back briefly to 2014, some of the things that the religious sector did not agree with. And this is about the AG. Let's take a look at that. All right, now this is the AG's rules that will require imams, pastors, rabbis, and other religious leaders to obtain certificates of good conduct from the police and clearance from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. All right, those are some of the things that the church disagreed with at that time. But remember, over the weekend, I know, Steve, you're itching to say something. Over the weekend, one of the religious leaders even talked about the certificates of good conduct in a way that was funny. He said 50% of the church leaders we see around, both traditional churches and current ones that we see, are former criminals.
You
had
cannot
that.
substantiate that.
But you had that,
I
right?
had it, but you cannot substantiate it.
Yeah.
That was just something that was thrown out there without any substantiation, without any basis.
Okay.
And
So
that's
you
the problem
disagree
we
with
have
that view?
completely.
Okay.
What are
Okay.
the figures?
First of all,
He should have given us the figures.
Okay.
He should have given us
He
the
said
churches.
50%.
From where? Which churches? What is the 50%?
Okay. Go in your quiet. That allegation.
No,
The 50% of
I
the
choose not to respond to this because the material conversation right now is should we be regulated or not.
I'm bringing the aspect of
hold
criminality.
on, I'll do this. And I think to keep this conversation right here,
Uh-huh.
when you put up a law, you are trying to cure something, okay?
Yes.
There has to be something that the law is trying to address and to cure, all right? The general sentiment I know from out there is especially about the use of money and its abuse. And I think the people around this table can agree with that.
Yeah.
It's the use of money and its abuse, okay? And there's a wanton perception that there's a lot of misuse of church funds and that's what I think this is trying to cure. Let me give you some history. What Muturi Kigano was bringing up, or wants to bring in a private member's bill to parliament, is not the first time. Let me take you and give you some history. In 1968, this was a conversation. How do we regulate church? Because at that time, it was only the mainstream churches that were
existed.
allowed.
Yes.
In fact, for churches to exist, you either had to be Anglican, you either had to be Catholic, you had to be. It is just the
Pentecostal,
mainstream that what our colonial powers had.
What we know as traditional
Exactly.
churches. Yes.
You have a law background, you can give me more history about this, that this law, the churches were actually incorporated into the Societies Act to cure one thing. And one thing that they tried to be able to cure is to include independent churches in this particular place. And so if we're going to try to look at the church through one particular lens, it's unfortunate because we come from different experiences. And this is the second one. In 2014, when the conversation started, I want to say this, the Attorney General Githu was trying to be able to regulate the Muslim part of the religious society, because at that time there were allegations of extremism in the mosque.
But why did they call all the stakeholders though?
Let me put it this way. The mischief here,
Okay.
the mischief of the government here was to want to regulate what was happening in the mosques.
Okay.
But they could not do that. And we called them out about that. If you're going to regulate all of us. You cannot exclude and say the church. That in itself is an abuse of the Constitution. Okay? You cannot just say this is particular way we're doing. If you're going to do it, regulate all of us across the board. Okay. Because the Societies Act covers all societies in itself. So if we're going to continue the conversation around this, let it go around that particular thing.
Okay.
If we're going to have far-fetched comments like my brother has had, then we can have another show about this. Yes.
Okay. I agree, Pastor Goy, because the question now, the niggling challenge is how to create a substantive law. We don't want regulation presupposes the existence of a substantive law. We need a bill, whether it's the Religious Societies Bill, whatever bill, by whatever name, that can then sanitize, the affairs or the management of churches, because then, the Constitution has also transitioned us from opaqueness. And churches cannot continue to operate as if they're not accountable to anyone. Within the church itself, there's a critical power imbalance, and we must acknowledge that. I mean, when we sat out there, I felt like almost the integrity of my voice was completely lost. I'm sitting with a bishop in a panel, and there's a pastor here. That almost affected my viewpoint.
Okay.
So, if you leave it for internal regulation, there are affairs that can be dealt with internally. What the state can also not do, the state cannot micromanage the churches.
Or cannot even purport to want to do it.
Yes, okay. But insofar as the church raises funds externally, for members, be it tithes, be it contribution projects, I'm an advocate.
There's need for.
And my church is forever doing projects, but that's fine. And there's accountability that is necessary. Remember, under the law right now, churches are unincorporated entities, which means they can't own property in their own names, but through their trustees, they can own property. And who are the trustees? And we are saying that the trustees are people who are also the founders of this church, which means property that belongs to the church is being held by individuals who can then control or influence how they apply those properties. If this issue of regulation comes up, we'll be able to say, let us have these trustees that acquire property in the name of the church be people that are not in the management of the church. It's very important.
That would be radical, but
well,
I don't know.
We need
I've seen the bill as you put it.
Yes.
And the bill actually goes on to say basically about qualifications of certain pastors and stuff. Mm-hmm. Every church has got its own structures as far as who they feel is qualified to lead them as a pastor. All right? I want to make it very clear tonight that ministry is not about degrees. Ministry is not about diplomas. A college cannot give you a calling. You're called by God.
But why do we have theological colleges?
Hold on, let me just finish. Mm-hmm. Theological colleges just come to enhance you and to sharpen you. Okay. And what the call God has given you. Okay. You can have all the degrees like a thermometer, but if God has not called you, let me tell you, it's a waste of time.
The bishop is preaching.
Let me tell you the truth. So you can no government can come and dictate to any particular church that your pastor should have this particular qualification. There is a freedom of worship in this country. What happens today if I decide to worship a goat? What happens today if I climb Mount Kenya 10 times and come down, I'm holy and I'm the mightiest because I climb Mount Kenya? It's my freedom of worship, it's my faith. So who comes to dictate to me I'm wrong or I'm right? You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So what I'm coming to say is about this qualification. The other thing you said in this bill is about that family members should not be involved.
Yeah, that's one of the proposals.
How can you discriminate a family member who has been called by God? If your daughter has been called by God, if your son has been called by God, so they're disqualified because their father was a bishop or a pastor, why don't we start with the politicians and disqualify their sons and disqualify their daughters also and their wives?
Yes.
So how is it limited to the church? These are things that the government will not be able to implement, to be honest with you.
Okay, so as a lawyer, you know what you can't... We need to take a break. Can I hear Maliba?
Can I...
Just briefly, we have a minute.
I will actually keep on bringing these issues that make the panel very, very unsettled because of one thing. The sector in itself is sick. So, like you said, when you are doing your introduction, you said that we are opening up all wounds. Yes. And you realize that those wounds, once opened, they are very painful and people want to wake up. So, we are debating faith and belief, things that are abstract and very difficult to subject to the tools of reason and logic. So, it's going to be so hard to try and be pragmatic about these issues.
Okay.
When you subject people to sweeping streets, when people are looted in the name of God, when we make money in the name of God, subject people to all, and when people are killed in the name of God, and we are not able to call out these things for what they are. And by the way, we should not synonymize religion with Christianity. There are Hindus, there is Islam here. Actually, we don't have a representative. We should have had one here.
We try to invite them, but we were unable to get one
out there. So we should not synonymize this regulation to Christianity.
Maliba, hold your thought. We're coming back, gentlemen. We still have a lot to discuss, but there's feedback that is already coming. Let me just take a few, then we can take a break. What do we have? All right, this is from Jacob Abere. He says, already our religious organizations are regulated by the Societies Act. Everyone agrees, only that laws under them aren't practiced to the latter, and also that they need to be revised because we do have some loopholes where even spiritual thugs have hijacked the pulpits. The second one, Kanyi Gyoko says the church has mutated into a multi-billion industry with affiliate schools, colleges, hotels, commercial, transport, etc., all hiding under tax-free religion haven. Freedom to worship, yes. Freedom to self-enrich, no. Let's regulate and tax. I think that's Malibu's point. Where he's going, a tax. Yes, we know. Actually, you pay taxes.
We pay taxes.
Not all of them do it.
We pay taxes.
They're exempted, and that is in law. You must
we are not exempted.
That is in law. No, there are areas that are exempted.
Say he pays taxes. He should not speak in the we.
Okay.
Because he has got a lot of other people he's speaking for.
In what area?
I need to take a break.
In what area is the church exempted from tax?
Yes. I need to take a break because that's one of the things we are going. That's one of the things we are coming to talk about.
We pay taxes. We pay taxes.
Maliba, Bishop, we are coming back.
I'm telling you, in what area? Be specific. Be specific.
Bishop, we are coming back with this discussion. Maliba, we're coming back, and the last one: religion should be regulated for purposes of transparency and accountability. Also, noise from churches and mosques should be regulated. I think that's already happened. All right, time to take a short break. We are back with this discussion. Stay with us.
The religious organizations can have their own registry, their own registrar, where they are going to be making returns. Instead of pastors and bishops going to line up in the same lineup with cooperative societies for fish, for sad, for makaa, for kila kitu, we want a registry with a registrar to deal with religious matters only.
All right, they say this is an attitude of self-importance. I don't know how that's true for that proposal, and even if it can pass, how do you as religious leaders have a different registry? But I'm still here with my guest. I have Steve Ogola, who is an advocate. I have Reverend Gowi here, and I have Bishop Murithi, and of course I have Arnold Maliba. Thank you, gentlemen, for holding. And let's talk about some of these things. I'll start from that. I know, Maliba, you're speaking, but just make sure you comment on the fact that they're even saying we need a separate registry for ourselves. We cannot make bishop and reverend and pastors with other people at the registry.
And that is why I actually was saying that we really are not going, we do not have to treat religion different, because the mechanics of what they do are the same. Earlier on I said matters of faith and belief are abstract, and you are not able to subject them to the tools of logic and reason. So we are at a place where Bishop says here that how are you going to stop a member of a family who is called by God? You realize that that conversation cannot be evidence-based, because no one was there when God called the family member. So God can decide, quote unquote, to call the entire family, and they take over the ministry. And at the end of the day, we actually have got Family and Sons Limited taking care of the ministry. And we know that religion is the other bit of politics. By the way, the first threat to any government is organized religion. Because whereas government, you know, he actually has been, the good thing about this debate is that at least I am not curtailed. So,
you can speak.
So, can I finish? Can I finish?
Okay, interject, Bishop.
Please protect me.
Let him know first and foremost that in the Bible we have the Levites. And all the Levites family actually were ministers. Levites, all of them, the father, the sons, all of them were in the ministry.
That is the Old Testament.
So, Old Testament. You don't believe in Old? I believe in the Old Testament if you don't.
So it only applies.
Okay, the Old Testament is the foundation. Listen,
it's being selective here.
The Old Testament is the foundation of the New.
There was a point I was actually making.
We have Levites. Everybody was
Bishop,
ministry.
let me get his point. Yes.
I need protection because there are different manner of fires. Of course, there's the holy one, and of course the heat that is coming out of this. So, as I was saying, it's important to actually say that we are having a discussion that is very difficult to table because we are not able to put it on the real test of analysis. You can't even do comparative analysis here. But that said, we must actually tell guys within the religious sector or circles that exceptionalism is what they actually have. And you know, they threaten a lot of times. Like somebody has been caught, he said that if you're going, look at this. That if you are going,
how do you analyze faith?
It's abstract.
He's going hot and cold at the same time. First of all, he's saying abstract, then he's saying analyze. How do you analyze faith?
That's why we cannot put it to
No, but he just said we cannot analyze, to be fair to him.
I said it's impossible to put it to any analysis.
Maliba,
okay, how do you analyze abstract?
We are talking about, that's why we want to regulate.
No, how?
Because you guys are calling exceptionalism. You are talking about being...
is before us. We have seen the bill.
Yes.
Can we discuss it?
We are discussing that, and you guys want to get through the roof. But the good thing is that there is no roof here. But you guys will actually have gotten...
Maliba, let me hear Steve. Yes, Steve. Yes.
We need to have a measured approach. You know, otherwise you're going to lose the viewers. And then I consider my place and role in this debate to facilitate civic education from a constitutional viewpoint. I claim no inner strength in terms of understanding the inner workings of faith. And that is not what this debate is about. And for me, I'm not open to pontificating broadly and widely and making sweeping statements that may require further substantiation. The core issue is this. Do we need to regulate this church? The answer is yes. This is an inescapable reality. Regulation exists, but it's not deeper and detailed in the manner in which we want.
Okay.
The church has evolved over time. So if we are talking about regulation, strengthening regulation, you can't sit in some corner in a room, draft a bill, and then just railroad everyone, you know, to accept that bill.
Were they not involved? Were the stakeholders not involved?
No, we have been involved through and through.
Okay.
And the church is already regulated.
Okay,
no,
Bishop, yes.
The state is not competent to single-handedly and to the exclusion of the church come up with regulation, a bill that then, you know, speaks for people, that excludes the users, the end users of that law. In terms of public participation, we will need critical input. In fact, if I see a proposal that says members of the same family cannot be in the management of the church, I'll tell you that's completely wrong. It's even unconstitutional.
Yes, it's discriminatory.
You can't. That's not the way to limit someone's right. You know, expression of faith. What is the mischief? What was the mischief they're trying to treat with that? What is it that makes you anxious that you may want to reach at that level where you say, let's not have family members? Is the public feeling that they're contributing so much, the church, and the pastors are growing wealthier and going on holidays and playing golf? Well, I think there's a reason. No, hold on. In terms of ecumenical activities, you know, the church, other than creating an atmosphere where people can grow and deepen their faith, the church has a function in terms of social welfare activities. And I have personally called this the ghetto gospel, which means the church is extracting resources from poor congregants and not disbursing those resources back to them, but holding these resources. This is what is making Kenyans feel anxious. We want to know.
Okay.
You can't say in a post-2010 dispensation, and I say this with tremendous respect to the church, that collection of tithe in my church, they project. Every Sunday, they project. Every project is accounted for. This is what Kenyans want. And if you are saying that pastors and bishops and everyone be salaried, let us know in advance how much they are earning.
But that already happened.
No.
That's already happened because I think Bishop said.
Let him talk about his church. Let him talk about his church.
Because the Bishop said all churches have internal mechanisms of regulating.
Yes, you talk about your church and how they project their tithes and offerings. All right? Some churches will not do that.
Bishop.
Okay, that doesn't make your church right, then the other one wrong.
Fine, I could actually drop that example. What I'm saying is, in terms of the core, what must settle is this. People want to know. And in fact, it's a constitutional...
Which people want to know?
It's a constitutional...
Which people want to know?
And I'm answering you.
We return books.
Policies are exposed.
I mean, I have to be...
I like to speak to Goey. Goey, you're rather quiet.
No, I'm not quiet. Yes. I'm not quiet.
I'm not quiet.
I think a part and parcel of participating in the conversation is to listen and where they're going. And allow me to hear his
okay.
Let me just briefly to summarize, because I've already overstated the point. The thing is this. We want an open, transparent, and accountable management of funds in the church.
Okay. Religion.
You can't run away.
Not even the church.
Religion.
Religion.
Whichever way, whichever faith. an open, transparent, and accountable management of those funds. Number two, I think the fact that this discussion about regulating religion, or maybe the church, is a strong indictment of the church's own failure, and they should start by admitting that in terms of social welfare activities, the church has taken a backseat. You get?
Okay.
And poverty is deepening in the church, and the leaders are expanding their wealth. The third issue,
So the
which
church is the driver of poverty.
the third and final issue,
Yes.
relates to the manner in which the church, the church by law is separate from the state. But it appears, if you observe the nature of government...
I'll talk about that. I'd like to talk about that. Don't preempt me.
I'll pause there.
Go. Now you can respond, because we need to move this conversation forward now.
I just need to give you a context.
Yes.
You know, people look at the church and have mistrust, okay? But when you look at the Constitution in itself, the doctrine of separation of powers was instituted by other political thinking and minds around there. And part of the separation of these institutions was you can't trust government. You can't, okay? And that's why government has been put in different places. We have the legislature, we have the executive and all that. The same comes with institutions in itself, okay? A bureaucrat somewhere right here at the AG's office is trying to regulate how I'm going to be able to do in that. I cannot trust what those motives are in itself. And so I'd like to be able to say that such laws were given to protect the public, the society, from the government, because the government can overreach itself.
Okay.
And so those are the things we need to be able to respect. So in essence, that's what we need to be able to understand. But then secondly, let's also go on that we as a church are part and parcel of society in itself. Okay, so as the bishop alluded, when these bills have been brought, we have been called to be a part and parcel of it, and we have been part of this conversation. So for what Steve is saying, I want to disagree with him in itself, because when they have called us for our feedback, Bishop has represented us in different forums, and his colleagues at their level have done. But let me explain and disabuse a fact, something that we have.
Go ahead.
1/3 of our health system in this country
It's run by churches.
True. Over 50% of our schools in Kenya were started by the church. So for Steve to make such an allegation that we have not contributed to where society is today as a church, I think is unfounded. It is far-fetched in itself. So let's look at these laws in history, in totality in itself. And I agree in many ways. Yes, there have been churches that have not necessarily lived up to that. But to blanket and wholesale of what the church is doing, I think it's unfortunate that way we have done.
Let me add on to what he said. Let me add on to what he said. You know, Ogala said that we want to know. We want to know how the finances of the church are. Is he trying to allude that the registrar of society is failing? Because churches have got meetings they have every year. And the registrar and the government checks our books every year. So when he says we want to know, the government does that every year in every church.
Probably he meant
and if you don't do that, congregation does know, of course. They do know, because they're the ones giving the money.
Talk about
and plus the fact.
Yes.
And plus the fact. I mean, I wonder if a particular church has got its own internal structures of leadership and stuff, and they decide to make the pastor rich by buying him a Range Rover, who is complaining?
Good question that I'm
Who's complaining?
They are congregants.
No, hold on a minute. Who's complaining?
Congregants.
Who? The problem is the people who are complaining about giving are not even givers in the first place.
No, that
they
is
don't
bullying.
Give.
That is
They don't,
bullying.
nobody's
This is
being forced.
intimidation, honestly,
Who's
Ken.
forced?
And you cannot allow
Has
intimidation on this panel.
anybody been forced?
Ken,
Has
this is
anybody
your
been
panel,
forced?
and you should not allow.
What the government should
Because
do,
they are being
listen,
manipulated.
who's
let him finish, then you come.
Let me finish.
Yeah, let him finish.
Who's
You will
being
respond,
forced?
Maniba.
Is intimidating
forced?
the panel. And you allow that.
We don't feel
What do you mean
intimidated.
intimidation? What is your
We
definition
don't
of
feel
intimidation?
intimidated.
What's your
That's
definition?
intimidated.
What's your definition of
What you are
intimidation?
doing.
Ogala, you're
wait.
What you are doing, man of
Please,
God.
then you don't know the definition.
No, this
Listen,
is it.
If
I
I
do.
stand up, I just give an example, and they're so jealous already.
No, he doesn't allow it.
They're so jealous already. You can see. They're so jealous already. And they first of all said, you can see how they're behaving. You can see how they're behaving. Already the guy is burning. All right.
Maliba, if you
I'm
let
just
the
giving
bishop
an-
finish.
Can you let me
How many
finish?
man?
Can you let me finish?
If you
How
let the
many
bishop
man?
finish,
Let me finish.
Maliba.
Okay, I
If
agree.
you let the
The
bishop
members have gone there voluntarily. The
Donated.
church gives his books to the registrar to check every year. If the government is failing, let's address the government failing, because they're not checking the church and other societies that have been registered.
Bishop, let me give a sentiment. I think that we may not have underappreciated from what Steve is saying. I think Maliba has a point in some way, because it's hard.
In all ways, actually. All of them.
Okay, yes.
You're my friend. With the freedom of worship,
Hold on. Let me give you.
Manipulation?
Just listen. Allow me, Bishop. Allow me, with all due respect. What they're saying here is there is a perception, and Maliba, people like Maliba, are feeling like they can't come and ask those questions. Okay, they can't come and ask the bishop.
Here.
Hold on.
You see the response we get on
Listen,
Maliba.
No, you said you got redeemed.
Maliba,
Maliba, you're born and redeemed.
Yes, but I go to ICC.
All right.
So what is the problem with the bishop being blessed?
He doesn't have a problem. That's why I don't have
You have a problem.
I don't have a problem with my church.
Maliba, could you allow
finish?
Reverend
You
to
see how
finish?
you personalize that?
Just to appreciate.
Let's allow.
Bishop, just to appreciate where they're coming from, I actually do understand in many ways they have high respect for us as religious leaders.
Is it respect or fear?
Let me say, I'm not going to put fear. There's a high respect
Who are you
for
referring
leaders,
to now?
Congregants, okay?
Yes.
So to come and ask us in some form of way, they might feel intimidated. However, I want to go ahead and support what you're saying. Every year, many churches report their accounts. In fact, in the Societies Act, okay, Cap 108, it is said, okay, exactly, let me finish, it allows any member of that society to ask for those and how those resources are dispensed. And if they have any particular thing, they can go to the registrar or the minister in charge of the registry and actually put in, you lawyers correct me, and actually put in measures for them to account for what they're doing. I want to come back and say this for the record in itself, okay? The church is regulated, and let me tell you how we subject ourselves to regulation. There are NEMA rules, there are NEMA laws. Bishop will tell you and us, there are certain decibels that we are supposed to be playing our music. KRA, there are laws that we subject ourselves to. All taxes and taxation are done. In fact, many churches have been subjected to audits and audits and audits. We don't go and write this thing on and we don't go to Twitter and say, Maliba, let me finish, okay? There are county government laws that we subject ourselves to.
We read all of them.
All right?
We have read all of them.
Let me do an out thing. So in essence, just to balance this conversation around this thing, I think the thing you need to be appreciate about this particular thing is the law is supposed to address some particular things, which I'm not sure, Maliba, you have as a policy analyst that you have answered that material question. What is this law you are trying to cure? What is this law mischief that they're trying to cure?
Can I be allowed to speak to that?
Yes, now you can speak.
We speak from a level where, and by the way, Dr. Gowi, you realize that I actually have listened to you and have not interrupted, and I respect the approach you are taking. I would like to say this, that at any particular time, you know, Bishop asked Ogola why, the learned friend Ogola, why, who are the people who are complaining? And Gowi here says that, for example, they subject themselves to NEMA laws. How many neighborhoods, put this question out there, how many people out there, last Sunday is just a day, last Sunday, 2 days ago, how many people in their estates really did not have their children sleep because probably just putting soundproof? And my church does that very well. So as I speak, I also live in a neighborhood where probably you would actually have a lot of problem around that. So what Ogola was trying to say was this, that the policy intervention is coming to treat a mischief that exists. And let us not synonymize this conversation around churches. Religion is wide. I'll give you an example. Let's start with the Rastafarians, for example. That's a religion. Rastafarians believe that smoking weed brings them closer to God. Yet, our laws prohibit doing weed if you are caught smoking weed. So some other religions, so what's the difference between another acceptable religion and what we call a sect? A sect is simply a marginalized religion because a majority of the people do not give it, or rather do not agree to it. There's no consensus that is actually widespread. So to say that churches are already regulated is a lie.
Okay.
And the other thing, to actually just buttress my point before I finish, is that everything Bishop is trying to say here, he means well. And I know Bishop, as a man of God, is there to defend the faith. By the way, you don't need to defend God. God is like a lion. You release it and it defends himself. God has actually taken care of his business all through the edges. So the church has really not been. And by the way, they know their way. Today they are here complaining vehemently about what this government wants to do. The same, by the way, about 18 months ago, the leaders and part of this government, actually all of them, now that we have got a cocktail of a government from both sides of the religion told us, at some elements, some people told us, you know, we cannot be having a religion, for example. So they're actually very, very loud. Yet during elections,
I'll talk about that, Maliba.
Okay, let me finalize this then. Let me then finalize this. I actually wanted to say this.
Yes.
That can I finish? Yes. Can I finish?
Yes.
I'm simply trying to say this, that churches are not regulated. The laws that are there are not even implementable. Okay. They are very weak.
We are back to where we began.
They are very weak.
Maliba, we are back to that.
Hold on. I think as a lawyer, I owe Kenyans a duty of care. I mean, I can't sit here.
Not be his priest.
No. Listen.
You know, Gola, honestly.
Just hold on.
Let's listen to Gola.
Hold your peace. Hold your peace.
Okay.
The church is regulated. Regulation is not sufficient. No, you can't say it's not. I've already said.
I can say.
Hold on. But
why are you saying I cannot?
I'm educating you, I'm a lawyer.
No, you are not. I'm actually a legal, a continuing student. So you cannot say that I cannot say some other things.
Can you allow?
He's a qualified lawyer.
My senior, I've allowed you. Go ahead.
Listen.
Okay, it's okay.
You know, if you attack common sense, you're going to emerge looking more
But faith and common sense.
No, listen. The thing is this.
Talk about the law of regulation.
Listen.
Law of religion. But we're talking about religion here.
Can you
No,
hold
he's
yourself
not.
Just
together?
speak. Forget about Maliba.
Now,
He's playing safe with you here.
because the
He
Constitution
doesn't want to be expelled.
Can we give Stephen
Pole,
opportunity?
pole.
the Constitution recognizes freedom of faith, of worship. But freedom of worship is not unlimited. That itself is a bit of constitutional regulation. Exists under Article 32, Article 24 of the Constitution.
Starts from Article 8.
The fact that there's the Societies Act presupposes that you're already submitting to some authority, regulative framework. So you can't say that there's no regulation.
Completely regulated.
The fact that the churches also have internal mechanism, the constitution that you must present, presupposes internal regulation. So we're not talking about the church not being regulated. And I said in my opening comment that regulation exists, but we need to deepen.
Okay.
Now, the other thing which is coming from the bishop is that enforcement is weak. You get? Because he's at pains. I mean, what are you talking about? Insofar as I'm concerned and the church that I run and we manage, we are trying our best to comply. But it's also not true that all churches are complying. But if churches are not complying, it's a shared problem. The enforcer, maybe, that's why I was saying that there may be need to pull away the church from the Societies Act. Listen, we have the Sports Act that was pulled from the Societies Act. We have the Corporate Societies Act. We have even the Law Society of Kenya Act. I mean, there may be need to, in order to deal with emerging challenges or weaknesses that the law presents, there may be need to have a separate bill. And I'm not saying that if you have a separate bill, it will take away or limit in a way that is not authorized by the Constitution the freedom of worship, the ability to manage the affairs internally, because even as we congregate here, the five of us, what does the Bible say? Where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. That's a congregation. That's a church.
Okay.
You know, an incorporated voluntary association. That's what a church is.
Okay. Bishop, we have to move forward.
Are you going on a break? Because
no, we're not going on a break now.
I think Arnold has to be careful when he talks about soundproofing and how his church is soundproofing and everything. I mean, so many religions are propagated here by loudspeakers every morning, and we never complain. So if he's talking about soundproofing in religious
that was just an example.
And propagating, you talked about how many children in sleep. Who complains about the religions that propagate with loud horn speakers? I allowed you to speak.
Yes.
That propagate their religion by putting horn speakers very early in the morning and when they're having their services, and nobody complains. But some people want to complain about church service that runs for 2 hours. So if you're soundproofing, let's go across the board and soundproof everybody.
Okay.
Ken, just to give you more history about this, when A.G. Githu Muigai came, when Professor Muigai came with a draft bill.
That's 2014.
2014.
Yes.
And he brought us in. We came and countered it with saying, let's come up with what we call a religious freedom bill. Okay? And we gave it is still sitting at the AG's office still today.
Okay.
And that religious freedom bill encompasses and tries to be able to, as you were saying, remove our religious societies from the Societies Act itself and have one. In fact, we even proposed a religious commission, society commission, that would be able to, in some way, address these particular things. Because at the enforcement level of these things, I will agree that the Register of Societies has failed in that particular. Maybe the capacity is not the same as what it was in 1968, but this is a thing that we did try to be able to do that. It's still sitting at the AG's office. And my proposal to people like Honorable Kigano is, check this out. Instead, we don't reinvent the wheel. It is already there.
Actually, if you look at even the proposals from Mheshimiwa, they're still just enforcing what already exists. So, Maliba, I have to really move this conversation. We will get stuck at this because I have a lot.
I will not really actually even get into mud. I'll just like to tell you one thing.
Just
that
one.
He's spoken about societies being voluntary and, of course, members having the right to show up. I don't want to talk about the mood on this table, but I'll tell you it's not easy for anyone in church to raise a voice and even question anything. If you are to refer to the mood on this table, it can tell you what will happen in a church setting. So it's not easy. That is why, by the way, regulation is actually being brought up to a level where somebody else can actually put these religious institutions to account. By the way, we are raiding mosques. We are asking questions. We are getting hold of sheikhs who are actually getting on the border of the law. We actually should do the same for all other religions. And it should not be the issue of exceptionalism. And you know, religion and exceptionalism are twins ever since time began. And that is where we get it wrong.
Timothy Njoya, all of us know Timothy Njoya, says, and this stems from what you said, Bishop, being a pastor requires as much professional training as being a pilot, surgeon, lawyer, or architect. It's not more otherwise. Jesus wasted his time training his disciples for 3 years, and Paul training Timothy and writing his lessons to him in the first and second epistle of Timothy. So he's basically saying,
I'm an advocate of it. I believe in education. I believe if driving a car, you need to be educated. If being a doctor, you need to be educated. Then if you're taking people to heaven, maybe you need to be more educated. It's only that it's so dicey when it comes to the issue of the call of God upon an individual. The people who have been called by God, and most of them have not even gone to school, have done even more works than people who have got degrees and everything. So it's a dicey situation. So I am a firm believer that when you're called, you need some training. Because if we train doctors, if we train lawyers who are here on earth, if I can entrust to take people to heaven, then you need to be educated.
All right, I'd like to talk about one thing you mentioned, internal mechanisms. I'm interested in how you get people to leadership of the churches. And this is to you, and then you can join into the conversation. Do these people, are they vetted?
Different churches have got different methods of putting people into leadership. The Methodist Church does it differently. They maybe have their own caucuses. The Baptist Church has their own system. The Pentecostal Church has its own system. So different churches, I mean, the systems are as different as the churches are.
Same thing.
I'd agree with him.
Yes.
I think the church, the way the church is constituted, and again, these are things that are, again, in the deed that is put in the societies, at the Register of Societies. Different churches have different ways to be able to accord people the titles that people particularly hold in itself. And so to prescribe that there's one way to do it, I would say it's difficult to be able to do.
You cannot prescribe how it's done.
There's going to be a problem with this approach, and the sooner we admit it and begin to innovate out of it, the better. We need to have a shared and settled approach to theological instruction, first of all. So that people, if you're calling yourself a pastor, it should presuppose a certain threshold of instruction. That's number one. If you're at the level of management, it should presuppose a certain level of commitment, personal integrity, a certain threshold. It can't be left to the whims of those churches and the leadership. I say this with tremendous respect, because what we want to deal with also as part of the existing problem, I know this affects some religious organizations, not all, but I speak for Kenyans that have a problem, which are already documented, with churches or religious institutions that have just given opportunity of people of dubious or questionable integrity to manage their affairs just because self-regulation allows it. We are going to have to reach a level, if need there be, if it's impossible in law, I don't think that's a legal impossibility, then we may have to separate and say who are the ministers who must be trained and can then now lead, be in the leadership of the church, who are the evangelists that can then promote the gospel. I am a born-again Christian. I can also promote the gospel in my own style without being accountable to external people. Because in that case, what I'm just doing is I'm just expressing my faith to you and conversing about my understanding about the Word of God.
Okay.
That's fine. So if we need to reach that level, because other states, comparatively, if there's an opportunity to discuss that, Kenya is not the only country that is dealing with the problem of regulating the church. There are other nations that have documented, there are other approaches.
Okay.
The UK.
But when you read the scriptures, with all due respect, Gola, just the Gospels, you find someone like Dr. Luke who was very educated. You find someone like Paul who was very educated. But then you have some other disciples who never even went to school. And Jesus Christ called them on an equal threshold. I mean, you have disciples who never went to school that Jesus called, and he called those who are educated. So this is something that has been there since time immemorial.
Okay. Okay, I think that's
Yeah,
settled. That's settled.
I'm thinking going to the level where we have to micromanage them, that's off. The issues we need to deal with are not issues to do with the details of doctrine and dogma and the practice and whatever they are doing. Can we look at those issues, the mischief we need to deal with?
Okay.
But if a church chooses to actually bring up people and give them titles in their own way, that is up to them. But the social issues that we need to address are what are key, by the way. If you go into that direction, you're not going to be very successful.
Okay. I'd like to play a soundbite.
Let me just call that
really
the elephant in the room.
Yes.
And I'd like to say, I think the public just want to know how we use the money.
How you use the money. We're going to discuss that.
I think
Not
that's the
that alone.
mischief. I think that is the
That's
major
really
Because
the
mischief.
even terrorism is related to religion.
I'm speaking from a place where I know. I think that's the mischief. But then
I tend to
secondly,
agree.
it's just on how we
should
govern
regulate
about it.
On the,
I think that's
on the lines of criminality.
Okay.
Okay.
So I mean, he has not said it, but I actually think if there's a mischief, from my vantage point, I think
what
that
it
is
is.
the. I think
Okay.
that is the.
Let's
question.
take a look at this soundbite, then we come and discuss that. What a lot of people want to know. Let's take a look.
Ikiwa Safaricom is the richest, inawezekana namna gani mimi mtu mmoja natoa pesa kila weekend, kila pahali kushinda hata Safaricom?
Nimejipanga na kanisa kwa sababu siwezi kuwa hasla hapa duniani alafu niende nikuwe hasla tena mbinguni. Hapana, hiyo haiwezekani. Ama ni aje? So lazima tujipange na Mungu ndio mambo yetu iende sawa sawa, na sisi wengine hatuna aibu ya kuhuzishwa na kanisa.
The DP must have read Malachi 3:10, right? He must have read it. But I want you to take a stand. I begin with the bishop. What's your stand on churches accepting donations from politicians?
Why not? Politicians are human beings. They have a faith. They believe in a God. Why would they not receive donations? I receive donations from everybody. I don't care where it came from. I sanctify it and I use it for God's kingdom.
Okay, Reverend.
Politicians are part and parcel of our congregations. I would not be surprised if many people, many pastors or other religious organizations, even mosques, they have politicians who are members of that itself. To come and, I think for me, my biggest issue is giving them the platform.
The platform, which I wanted to talk about.
To pontificate about their giving in itself. That's where I have my problem in itself. If I look at my own interpretation of the Bible, it says the left hand should not know what the right hand is doing in many ways. So giving them a platform to talk about the gift that they're giving or whatever them, yeah. But
how else would we know they're cheerful givers?
but that's I see what you did there.
Yes.
But here's the thing. I see what you do there.
I can do that.
However, I would be able to say politicians and other people are members of our congregations. We cannot stop them.
Okay, I'd like your response.
No, just to add on what he said.
Yes.
Yes, people would give politicians, they're Christians, they're human beings, they're Muslims, they're Hindus, they have a faith. He has a problem with people announcing their gifts. I too have a problem, but the Bible says those who do it for people to see, they've already received their reward here on earth. But those who give quietly and secretly, they receive their reward from the Father who is above. So you can give to get a reward here on earth, or you can give it to get a reward from heaven.
Heaven, yes.
Ken, I would like to say this, that the Bible we read, and all of us actually ascribe to, at least the people seated on this table, talks about God being a God of order. Therefore, regulation and order is very, very important. Now, on giving, I think the church in itself is a big economy, that the money they receive from politicians is very small. It's actually a very big economy, by the way, and whatever money they get might not be targeted, resources targeted to the most important parts of the economy. Now, if you allow politicians to bring in, that's what I talked about, money laundering. The religion, not just church alone, they allow preachers to come, or other politicians to come in, and by the way, it will be so hard for you to bring a politician here, because that politician wants to please a congregation somewhere. And you know, politicians love congregation, so they will bring in any money. Today, if you went to the bank, the threshold has been brought down from 700,000 to 200,000 shillings. If you're going to take it out or bring it in, you'll be asked at least to state some basic reasons. It's only in church where you can show up with 10 million shillings in a gunny bag or a bag, and nobody asks where you've gone. They just say, and by the way, there is an old missionary who used to say that he doesn't care wherever money comes from. He will sanctify that money with the tears of orphans and widows and others. And that is what I think Pastor was saying in here. So, but I would say, what does it really talk about the moral bit of it? I heard Bishop Mark Kariuki saying that church is not the space for government. Yet, just the other day, they prayed in for these guys to come in here. They told their congregation, God had told them that these people in here, by the way, besides the political problem we have, church is the next problem. Okay. Because they tell us God has told them about these guys. They pray for them, allow them to do those things. And now they're here complaining.
I don't think it's open the church to devalue the place of accountability.
Yes.
You have to hold people to account. That is how we are organized as a society in post-2010 dispensation. The ideology, the overriding ideology under the Constitution, which by the way influences even the doctrinal foundation to a certain limited extent, or rather, there should be some counterbalance, because when the church is being founded, there has to be a statement of faith. What do you believe in? Is there a church that does not believe in accountability? If your son comes home with 10 million, you know, you can't have accumulated that in a year. I'm just going to say, fine, build a home for me, I'm happy. Let my neighbors and my friends come and celebrate with me. I'm not going to ask why you've gotten, how you've gotten this money. We have to hold politicians to account. We must ask
But
them.
that's not the work of the church.
No. The church
it's not the work of the church.
You talked about. Hold on. You asked a direct question.
Yes.
Politicians bringing money to the church, and the church receiving this money without asking questions. And I'm saying they have a residual obligation to demand to know where this money is coming from, and if they have reason to believe. Because you see, we are not removed from common sense. If you have reason to believe that this is not clean money,
then
you can't receive it.
So you can't, should we ask just the politicians, or should we ask everybody?
So every time a politician shows
not just the
up
politicians.
at House of Grace,
Not just everybody.
where did you get the money?
Not just everybody.
If you have
Just
got,
hold on.
Even the people giving, they don't have to be politicians. Do you have to ask them?
No, hold on. You have to allow time
But if
for
you have a
someone to
bad
deepen
son
the
and he
point.
comes back with something, you have
Maliba,
to
let
ask
him
where he
finish.
got it
I think
from.
it's fair if Steve
In
finishes.
terms of governance, and I want to just signal this, the church, away from the matters of faith. Since the church, by our constitution, the church and the state are separate, it means if you look at the church through the lenses of governance, the church could be considered, in fact, to be part of the civil society. The critical role of a civil society, the civil society must be vigilant, must be critical, must be robust in its approach to checking the excesses of government, including persons in government. If the government corners you, and you know, when politicians bring money to the church, they have assessed the level of influence in this country. We are deeply spiritual, religious, I would say so, maybe even spiritual. And they know that the way to penetrate the minds of Kenyans is to support the projects, lift part of the burden they're having and the challenges they're having in church. You know, go there, pump some money. It will cure all accountability questions. They will lay their hands on you. Who are you? I mean, we are struggling to stabilize our democracy and our governance, but I'm seeing my pastor laying his hands on someone who I have issues of accountability as a governance expert. I think the church must have some residual responsibility to interrogate someone's ability to contribute the kind of money they're giving.
Bishop agrees. He agrees. He only has a problem with the platform. But let me take it back to Bishop, listening to both of them.
I think it's giving the church a lot of work, which we are not capable of doing. Because why are you restricting it just to politicians? Everybody who comes to church gives his donations in one way or another. So why are you restricting? I mean, it's only the politicians who have got corrupt money. What about the other members who come every Sunday? It's too much work we can't do. All we do is to receive tithes and offering as God has commanded us. We are not CIAs to follow people and find out what they're doing and what they're not doing. Our work is to preach and to teach. and to believe that God is going to touch their hearts. So if somebody comes, forget about the politician who gives, even a prostitute that comes to my church, I will lay hands on them. Even a witch doctor who comes to my church, I will lay hands on them. So don't restrict it to just a politician.
Would you do the same if you were told beforehand that Ken is going to come to your church and make a donation and that money is proceeds of corruption? Who? Would you receive that money?
Who will tell me?
I'm giving an example.
No, if they told me these are proceeds of corruption,
yes,
then maybe I'll tell you, please.
What maybe? I need a straight answer.
If they told me
yes,
that these are proceeds of corruption,
yes,
then I will talk to the person.
You would. You
yes,
would.
I will.
Okay, you would.
I need to buttress what my learned friend Gola has actually been saying here, that the church has got that obligation to speak to accountability. Otherwise, they will not have the moral authority to be the voice of conscience, to speak up. And actually now, you see, if you give a vague answer the way Bishop has given,
it's not
then
a vague
tomorrow,
answer.
It's very vague.
We are already accountable to the
Then tomorrow,
we said already.
Then tomorrow you'll actually speak out and tell people about virtues and about how to do. If they are going to be the voice, if the church has to be the voice that speaks sense, and by the way, I need to tell you this, Ken, from the religious circle, let me speak about the Christian circle. What happens on the pulpit is what happens in the king's court, because historically it is the preacher, you will call him the prophet, who will anoint the king. These guys anoint these corrupt guys. They receive with joy and thanksgiving the way he's doing here. And then those guys come and loot from us, and they're like, Uta do what? Because after all, even the bishop and the person you go to has no problem with that. So accountability, Bishop, you can't run away from that. And it is your work. It is your work.
We already said we are accountable to the government.
You are also accountable to God.
So clear. Yes.
You're also accountable to God. So if you have got a bad child who shows up and you know that this is a bad child,
do you want us to go back to the debate?
You are not
accountable to the government.
You are not.
We have got
if you say you don't give a damn about what they bring and where they come from, that is not accountability.
We return our books every year.
No, we are talking about receiving stolen money.
Taxes.
We are talking about fraud. We are speaking about money laundering.
Let the police do its job.
Cleaning politicians.
Let the police do its job. I'm not a policeman.
You are.
Let the police do their job.
Watchdog?
Yes, he is. And by the way, he stands in a higher position because he speaks for God.
Let the police do the job.
I think I appreciate what Tom was saying about the church playing a prophetic role.
Tom?
Sorry, Steve.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. When Steve was saying we have a prophetic role to call out, especially those who are given the responsibility to lead us as a nation. I think the onus, and it behooves us to be able to call them out. But I need you to also appreciate where the bishop is coming from. How do we know? How do we know? We can't be part and parcel of a public lynching outside there. Mm-hmm. How do I know that, to say it's Honorable Maliba, all I've just heard, just use you for an example, yes. This is a politician, he's my local MP, all I've had is allegations about him. How do I know about this? The most I can be able to do is call him out and ask, what is this that is happening that I hear about him? You know? But you put us in a very, very difficult position. I don't discount the place of what Wakili has said. Yes. We do have a place for a prophetic role, but it is you put us in a difficult position because we do not know if these allegations are true, and we wouldn't know. Okay. I mean, we are at the same place as the public, okay, in many ways. However, if we do have the opportunity of coming to the knowledge about what it is, I believe it is incumbent on us to be able to call it out. Yes, it will be different.
And this brings in the aspect of the church speaking in different voices. We've seen churches where there's a lot of violence, infighting. We've seen pastors and priests and bishops and deacons and all those church leaders who've been accused. But I'm trying to bring in the aspect of why is it that the church is often quiet when there's a lot of things they need to speak about? Why is it that there's a lot? Politics, the country is burning. The church will always
The church is not quiet.
Yes.
The church speaks all the time. It's the people who don't listen. We spoke about the Constitution that we passed and told you there were problems. It was passed. Now the country is crying. The church took its place and spoke it as it was. So tell me when the church was quiet. The church has always been speaking.
But how comes when it comes to that, you think we don't listen? And
well, you didn't listen. You went on and passed on the Constitution. Now you're crying about it.
But the church is the biggest
now
movement.
Now you're crying about it.
The church is the biggest movement.
No. We said there were problems with the Constitution. Don't pass it. I was in the no movement.
But we still passed
All right,
it.
you passed it.
That's just one example.
So now you're coming to my own movement again. You're joining me after you've suffered and after you paid the cost.
I'm talking about politics. The country is burning.
That is politics.
We don't see them.
When?
We don't see.
Give me an example.
We didn't see even last year when things were bad.
Give me an example when the church didn't talk.
2017. What did you say?
2017.
Yes, when the country was burning.
We spoke.
No position.
The church has always had a spokesman.
Bishop, there was
we
no
were
position
in
that
meetings
was
all the
taken
time.
by the church.
We were in meetings all the time. The bishops were in meetings all the time. I was in those meetings. And we were on TV, including NTV. Bishop Makarioki and Bishop Kitonga and the rest were always speaking.
Ken,
it is true.
It's true the church speaks.
It is true.
It's true the church speaks.
But do you understand?
I know what you're saying. And he's right. The church is speaking. Unfortunately, their actions are so loud that we can't hear their words. Their actions of receiving politicians, taking their money, praying for them, telling them God has said, and we know this one is a
voted for,
so we
you voted for these politicians.
No,
so you're saying you come to the tail end.
You voted for these politicians.
Some of you said
you
God
voted for them.
Said they are the people.
You voted for the president.
We were
you
told,
voted for the deputy president. You voted for the county government. You voted for these governors and senators. All right? Okay. If they come for assistance from heaven, I'll give it to them. Because you have voted for them.
If the church
you
has
voted
to
for
speak,
them.
the church has to speak through
you
action.
voted for them. Unless you want to change
the Bible says
do you want to change the
only use words when it is necessary.
It is God who lifts. And it's God who puts one down.
Actions are too loud, we can't hear the
God
words.
has lifted these people. We have to acknowledge that. It is God who gives kings. It is God who removes them. I will pray for the president. I'll pray for the deputy. I'll pray for the governor. I'll pray for the senator.
So long as you come at the tail end.
The Bible says pray for the leaders that we may live in peace.
I think the church's underwhelming performance, especially in the times of crisis, has been fully highlighted.
It has.
We can't run away from that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, the thing is this, and I just want to highlight one example so that I can document my grievance with the church. Because the church is supposed to incubate change. They're not doing that. What is keeping the church so busy when the country, if you look at Kenya and our approach to governance through global lenses, you'll realize that this country is stranded at the margins of time. We are dealing with the problems we dealt with 10 years ago before the new constitution. We have a new constitution without a new philosophy. We are stranded. The church is listen, the church, the way I understand it in terms of its participation and input in governance, the church in Mount Kenya will always endorse one of their own. The church in Nyanza will always endorse one of their own. The church in Nairobi takes a position depending on the lenses that is convenient to it. And I'm saying that if the church does not sit in retrospect and reimagine its role in terms of incubating change, because you see, at the level of formation of government is organized at the ballot. These are people that Kenya is a deeply religious country. Every Sunday and every Friday, you find Kenyans of faith trooping to mosques. On Sundays, Saturdays, and Sundays, you find them in churches praying, and they are under the care. And weekdays and weekends, the pastors and ministers are there in their homes. Where is the level of conversation about building civic virtue? We need to build civic virtue. You see, this is a conversation that you can't leave to governance enthusiasts alone.
Yes.
Civic virtue, telling people that, listen, as for me, as your bishop, as your pastor, I'm not going to process things through ethnic lenses. But if you want to do it, Ken, that's up to you. You've already indicted you. I think that kind of conversation...
Where does the reasoning of the bishop sit with you when he says that, they come at the tail end? You voted that governor. You voted that president.
No.
Why should he comes at the tail end?
He's simply saying we are on our own.
Yes.
No.
He's not saying that. He's saying that he comes at the tail end.
When politicians get wrong, we are on our own. We elected them.
Yes,
but when they show up and bring their tithe and they pray for them, and even give prophecy that this is what God is saying,
people always get
at that particular time, God is saying.
People
and then now we are on our own.
Ken,
right.
Let me clarify something for purposes.
So you're blaming everybody, including the people who vote.
Listen, for purposes
You
of
just
civic...
blame voters.
No, you blame the voters.
You have just blamed voters.
Bishop,
Say that we elected them.
No. I said God is on the list.
Bishop and Maliba, we'll leave you this table.
For purposes of civic education,
yes.
Let me say this. The church can't come at the tail end.
Okay. They need to be right there at the beginning.
One of the critical pillars undergirding the Constitution is public vigilance. Building consensus on what is right and wrong. Which other place is better to settle a moral conviction? If you have a sense of right and wrong, you're probably going to make it to heaven anyway. That's what the church is trying to do.
Okay.
So in your church, that is where you incubate civic virtue.
Okay.
When you emerge, you start influencing the people around you, when you start rejecting politicians and their money and their influences, they'll begin to change. But once they realize that they can influence you,
I think
instead of you influencing them,
with pastors and bishops, you can teach them how to run churches.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about critical pillars regarding the constitution.
We have a distinction. Yes.
I think I hear what Tom is saying.
Steve.
Sorry, Steve. Sorry. I have an acquaintance. We share the same last name. I'm not baptizing you. What Steve is trying to allude here, and I think I hear it, is the nation is looking for leadership. And where the leadership fails at the political level, the default is going to the church. And I think I agree with Steve in many ways, Wakili, in the sense that the church in many ways have failed to give the leadership that the nation would require. However, this is not to preclude the fact that the church continues to teach people about integrity, wisdom, accountability. Every Sunday we'll be able to do that. I can tell you many churches that have preached about this. And it's incumbent of our congregation to be able to put these things, especially when they come to voting in itself. I'm not going to change the heart of somebody if they are going to see their tribesman at the ballot and that's how they're going to vote. What I hope is that these principles that they have learned, that we have taught them, they will take them to that. But I actually do acknowledge in his place that the church in many ways sometimes has failed to come in and offer that leadership that the nation would want. However, the church is not, that is not our role. Our role is not necessarily to give leadership. I know where people expect
I don't like that.
Hold on. Let me finish. Let me finish, okay? Okay?
You don't have to like it.
You see,
I'll come back.
We are not a theocracy in itself, okay? And so there's a limit to what we need to be able to do in many, or what we can do in itself. But I do acknowledge the sentiments that Wakili has said, that there are many ways the church has failed to be able to give the leadership that the nation wants.
The reason why I said I don't like that is because we just got off this conversation about the responsibility of the church, looking at who's bringing what and where is it from. And we sort of agreed that it's not their role, although Wakili tried to steer us in that line. And now you're saying it's not also your role. You know, the church cannot do that.
It's a double-edged sword in itself. You want us to comment on everything. Let me just give you one. My inbox is always says, so what do you have to say? What do you have to say? I don't have to speak on every particular thing that goes on. However, the things that we need to be consistent about, and again, I want to acknowledge what Akili is saying. I think there are places where the church needs to give leadership. And given the opportunity of going on further, I think, I think it would happen. We're having a generation of new church leaders in this country, okay, who are responding to that thing. We are not oblivious to the fact that inflation is having a problem. We have unemployment. We're not oblivious to school fees going up. Right now, the nurses are going up. We're not oblivious to that because we have to do that. So the churches do respond, but it's not in the same way that you'd want us to
I need to give
respond.
Arnold, unless you have something.
I'm just wondering, I mean, just to support what you're saying, how many times do you have these people in a week? We just have them once a week. The church plays for how long? For 2 hours. The church just does so much in 2 hours, and there's so many other institutions and stakeholders that are going to better this society. It's not just, I think using the church and putting the blame on the church heavily is just escapism. That won't help us at all. Let me even hasten to add, there are countries that have no churches or religious movements and are doing much better than Kenya. So our issues are not just about the church.
Okay. Maliba, we need to start winding up, so don't make it long.
So, but we actually are almost winding up this, and in the clips you played, there are actually religious leaders who supported regulation. So it's not even true.
Measured regulation. If you play the whole clip, it's
well, regulation at any particular time, it's never radical. It's always measured. Because rationalism is an element of law at whatever way you look at it. So there are, and I actually saw the Catholic Church say, so long as regulation does not interfere with the right to worship, the right freedom of worship, why are we not talking about that? And by the way, like the Catholic Church, for example, last year I was looking at some data, and there is about 200 billion US dollars globally. But out of that, 58% of it went to education, 28% went to health. Would local churches actually give data that is closer to that?
Okay. Dan, I want to speak about one more thing, and I'd like you also to join in this conversation. Bishop, Reverend, how do you get these titles? How do you get this title? How do you get the title of Reverend? Yesterday you're pastor, today you're Reverend, the following day. And the reason why I'm asking this, there are ridiculous titles in this country.
Okay, let me answer that. Let me go how we do it ourselves, or how it's supposed to be done in the evangelicals. I'm a bishop. I didn't call myself a bishop. I'm a bishop because I've got pastors across this country that I oversee.
Okay.
So one who has pastors that he or she oversees, you become a bishop. And I do know we have a lot of briefcase bishops who have no church, who have no pastor they oversee, but they call themselves a bishop. But a true bishop is a bishop who has churches he oversees, pastors who are under him, and he gives them guidance and gives direction. That is a bishop.
Okay. Okay.
There's an ordination process that many churches go through. The ordination process starts, let me give you an example. Here at Nation Media Group, you have what we call a leadership pipeline. You know how you go up. You know, if you're here, you start as a cubby reporter, you go on to become a what editor, sub-editor, then you become an editor, then there's a chief editor, managing it. You know how you'd be able to do this. There are certain processes that we also have within the church. It's not just around your credentials that you do have. There's also a discipleship process that you go up, and each particular process that you go up, you're given another particular, how would you say, office or title in itself. And so, and this is part and parcel of it. And to be given the term reverend, there's an ordination process. Like I did go through a rigorous almost process for over 1 year of training, of reflection, and all those things. Before
what is the highest level, Reverend?
I mean, the highest level.
Yes,
it's different. It's different in different denominations and stuff like that.
Just give me a Boleyn.
Churches are different.
Let me put
no, just the highest.
The highest.
Which church?
Let me give you. Let me settle. Can I settle it?
Yes.
The highest is being Lord of all, King of kings, and the Savior of the world, and that is Jesus Christ.
No, that's down here.
That is the highest level.
Bring it down here.
That is the highest level which you cannot aspire to.
It depends to the church.
Yes.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking this question, we've had titles such as the mightiest. The mightiest.
I think we need, and I think
Ogola can comment on that.
I feel disillusioned, terribly disillusioned. And I think Kenyans must begin to look outside the church if they want to stabilize their affairs. In terms of interacting with God and your faith, that's fine. You can come to the Reverend for spiritual instruction and Bishop for spiritual nourishment. But I'm not going to rely on the church to help to influence our order of governance, because the kind of opaqueness in the church is just so depressing. I mean, I've hoped that I could get some settled and shared understanding on the how do you call it, the structure,
yes.
the structure, and so that we can move the conversation to a level of say, listen, it devalues you who have undergone training to be called a reverend. Then someone just emerges and just, I'm a reverend. And then the next day, he's able to put 2 or 3 people on salary, call them pastors, then he calls himself a bishop. I think that's why I'm thinking, although it's very difficult to regulate some of these indigenous churches, but I think I see the need now to have a conversation that in the future will put us at an equal pedestal where if you're truly a bishop, then we know there's a shared minimum expectation that we have from you in terms of training, in terms of experience, in terms of spiritual depth, in terms of commitment, because my church, Anglican, has a very different way of ordaining people, and it's a very rigorous training process.
Okay.
I think right now, because the church is unable to appreciate opaqueness in the way in which even people rise through, I think then we can't rely on the church. No wonder we can't rely on the church to inject transparency and openness and accountability in other public spheres of influence.
Okay.
That's really, really...
What is opaque to him is not opaque to the people, to the other people. I need to clarify this, that different churches have got different internal mechanisms as far as who's going to be the pastor, who's going to be the reverend, who's going to be the bishop. What is opaque to you is not opaque to them. They have systems and structures they respect and honor.
Okay.
And this is all enshrined in the freedom of worship, as I began by saying. Okay, so I need to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but then we must give it to Ogola for actually being able to carry a gun and not appear like he carries a gun. He hits hard, but very softly. Thanks for that. And then Bishop, as we come to the end, by the way, I need to actually say that, but then you realize that Bishop has actually crossed the floor. He's actually spoken about briefcase churches, briefcase bishops, the very issues I was raising, and he really
no, just like any profession.
So,
just like any profession.
Yes, there must
there must be those.
So
just like any profession.
at the end of the day,
I'm not saying everybody's okay.
Yeah.
No.
Good.
I'll be.
But that's
No.
But Bishop, that is where I was.
We have lawyers who are out of order in this country. Nobody's talking about it. We have
them.
doctors who are killing people. Nobody's
bad.
talking about it. We have engineers who are making buildings collapse all the time. Nobody, just like every profession,
Bishop,
you'll have those.
Yes, true.
But then for all other professions, if you become rogue, if Ogola became rogue today, he will be disbarred. But then how do you disbar a bishop who owns his own church?
Well, let me tell you, there's so many who are rogue and not disbarred.
A lot
we
of
know,
them.
and we know so many. We know so many of these organizations that protect their own.
There is a
how many
procedure.
patients die?
And the
doctors protect their own.
There is a procedure on taking
how
care
many,
of
how many die?
It's true.
And doctors protect their own. Come on, we live in this country, man. We live in this country.
But then there is no procedure of taking care of a pastor down here. I don't want to mention the name who did everything.
We have evangelicals.
So my point was that
Kenya.
Ogola and I might not be in a position to actually comment on how
the structure
goes on.
Yes.
But we also sit in amusement and just watch as guys show all of, of course, God is a God of suddenly. He can actually do some of these things suddenly. But then it's only within that level where guys show up from nowhere. And they are the mighty men of God, they are doctors, they are bishops, everything. That's why I told you they have bastardized the education system.
You always comment on what you don't understand. Don't comment on what you don't understand.
Now that you cannot authoritatively talk about this,
you don't understand it.
We need to conclude. We need to conclude.
Yeah.
Really?
But you know, just admitted.
I think Jesus would have really been.
That's why I said that we are amused
Jesus,
at it. Yet he actually.
Jesus would have been criticized by these guys too much. He took mud and put on somebody's eye. That could have been criminal to these guys.
But Jesus is the Son of God.
Oh yeah, okay, he's our master. He put mud on somebody's eyes. So if I put mud on your eye, what will you say?
It will get
That's in closing.
It will get better. You will make it even blind.
And get healed.
Are you sure?
And he got healed. He got healed after the mud was put.
Yes.
But all of us on this table are actually putting on
we follow
spectacles.
Jesus.
That should say something.
We follow Jesus.
All of us need healings,
We
including
follow
you,
Jesus. We follow
True.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask supplementary question to the two of you. Someone has asked me to ask you, what is this thing about you church members calling? I don't know if they call you dad and call your wife mom.
Listen, as I said, every church has got its own system and structures. I believe in spiritual sons and daughters.
Okay.
Paul had a son called Timothy. He says, my son Timothy, I've given birth to you in the ministry. So we believe in sonship and daughterhood.
Okay.
That's where it comes from. There's a scripture of sonship. Nobody ever became anything in scripture if they didn't have a father. To be a minister, you have to be initiated. Elisha was initiated by Elijah. Timothy was initiated by Paul, and on it goes. So that's where it comes from.
Great answered. Do you need to belabor that? I think it's answered. Perhaps I can ask you the supplementary question. There are these two gospel artists.
Which two gospel
The
artists?
two gospel... Oh, that's a tricky question.
Yes.
That's a tricky question. There are these two musicians who claim they sing gospel songs, and they were caught on the wrong side of the law, right? Do you mentor them? What do you tell them when they come to church, for example, if they come to church?
Ken, these are members of our congregations. I think it would be irresponsible of me and disrespectful of these gospel musicians to discuss them around this table.
No.
I'm just saying,
honorably.
honorably in that sense. My role as a pastor is to pastor these gospel artists. And so I'm going to ask respectfully, in many ways. Okay. I will choose not to be able to comment on that. These are members of our congregations. They do have their pastors, and I will choose not to be able to do that.
Is this the reason why they say churches choose the one to speak about? You feel it's comfortable, you want to talk about it.
My brother,
you don't feel it's comfortable, you don't want to talk about it.
I'm not going to be the first person to throw a stone. I am a fallen, broken man that serves in the pulpit. If I am to come, there are many people who could say.
My question was specific.
I'm answering your question. I'm answering your question.
Yes.
And so, if I had the opportunity to speak to these gentlemen who have been in the media, I would embrace them. I would pastor them. I would walk with them, because we are fallen people in many ways in itself. And so that is how we'd be able to.
Great answer, Bishop.
support it.
Oh, great. Let's go to our segment of Toonside. I'd like you to take a look at this cartoon as we end, and I'd like your comments about this cartoon. It was in 2017, right? But we just decided to bring it up because we never had religious leaders on the set. You remember this cartoon?
This was during just around the elections.
Yeah, after the was it just before the election or after the election? I think after the disputed election.
Yes.
Yes. You comment on that. This religious leaders and well, our religious leaders always appear or speak with one voice, but they're being God or they're not speaking. And then at the tail end of that zip is written hypocrisy.
Well, I like Gado's humor, and I take it with a pinch of salt in itself. I remember this thing in itself. This was just after the ruling.
Yes.
Was this the thing that came after the ruling?
I'm trying to look at the date. It was November of 2017, after the ruling of the first.
After the ruling.
Yes.
This actually was after probably just after the inauguration, or just around there. I would say in many ways, I have no comment.
I think that captures the mood of the ordinary mwananchi. The church has to be more open to reality of the day, that people are feeling that the church has lost its voice. Why? That's a question that only the church can answer. Why is it unable to speak to matters that are so obvious? Everyone is speaking, you know. Is it because of the closer relationship with political leaders, the political elite? Is it because of, they don't want to antagonize? Actually, that did come out. But I think sometimes churches, especially pastors and bishops, come under intense pressure not to alienate certain segment of their congregation. You don't want to say something that antagonizes your congregation. I think the church must be able to speak firmly and boldly and directly, even if a certain part of the congregation feels
uncomfortable.
They
Actually,
must speak.
This was September 2017, so it was after the disputed election.
Yes.
Okay. So they never spoke. The question I was asking, they never, sometimes Kenyans expect you to speak and you don't speak.
So, like I said earlier on, the cartoon simply reinforces what I said, or probably I was reinforcing what the cartoon says, that whereas it's true the church speaks verbally, their actions are louder than their words, so we can't even hear them because we watch what they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bishop.
Well, I take this with a pinch of salt because it's not totally correct what I see.
Okay.
Because I do know there are some people who are depicted in that cartoon who spoke. And the fact that it was God doesn't make it gospel truth.
Okay. Okay. That is an impression. All right, gentlemen, let's take a look at some of the feedback before I let you go. And this is on Twitter. Punguza Mzigo, this is Frederick Okango, SG for Third Way Alliance. Churches must be regulated. In fact, majority of Kenyans profess a belief in God, be it through Islam, Christianity, religion, remains a great influence on our culture, politics, and public policy, and that requires certain order of operation. I think we have debated this the whole time. And when Johi says churches and religion must be highly regulated, the many who are wolves on sheepskin or in sheepskin, poor people are bearing the biggest brand. John Midivo, an advocate, we have presented a bill, Religious Freedom Bill. You spoke about it, right? Yes. You spoke about it, created with participation of all religious groups since 2017. The AG and the Registrar General have totally refused to acknowledge it. It's a travesty. We still have one more. Vladimir Rov, if you try to cut the church, it will grow like wildfire. Jesus himself will separate the wheat from the chaff in the day of the harvest. What you can do is help them self-regulate because the Bible is their constitution. And the last one, indeed the church is more chaotic than the Matatu sector. How do you explain the never-ending fight for leadership in church? It's a hideout for looters laundering their money with millions of generous donations every Sunday. Because the bishop is senior, I'll give you 30 seconds to finish. We have to end this. 30 seconds.
I'll start and say that being a preacher is the second most important job after being a mother. So the work they do is very difficult. Of course, dealing with people who are like myself, sometimes they can actually argue, but I actually appreciate the work you do. What I'm actually trying to say throughout was that we expect you to slightly raise up to the hour. Everyone, and I'm not alone. If you go out there, there are so many people who speak my language, and you need me. If not, I might not even bring the offering, but you need me as a soul if you really want to get to God and say, I worked.
Okay. Still.
Regulation is going to happen as a matter of course. I'll just urge the church to take a firm leadership so that we don't end up with a law that is not practical, that is difficult to implement. Otherwise, we can't fight regulation. And then, number two and the last, let the church be more open to holding people, especially the elected leaders, to account. That is how we will stabilize our democracy and improve our order of governance.
Well said. Reverend?
I recognize our failures as the church, and I'm not going to stand here and say we are perfect in itself. And when it comes to the place of transparency, I would say and challenge the rest of the churches in this country to step up in the place of transparency. There are churches that are doing it, but I would like to challenge them, especially when it comes to financial transparency, to live up to what it is. Yeah.
Okay. And finally, Bishop.
Well, I truly do appreciate this interview tonight, and we'll say that the church should actually regulate itself, and that if there are any laws that are going to be coming, the government must include the church and have the caucuses from the church if anything is going to be of benefit to the church and this society. Otherwise, it's just going to be a wild goose, and we'll be talking about something that is completely impossible to implement because faith matters are very different. In fact, I would advocate that the Catholic Church regulates itself. I would advocate the Methodist Church regulates itself. I'd advocate the Evangelical Church regulates itself. And that's the best I can do. The government knows very little when it comes to the church and the running of the church, and faith matters.
Right. And finally, now that they have spoken, let's cross the borders to Rwanda, where the government last year closed thousands of churches and dozens of mosques as it sought to assert more control over the religious community. Now, President Paul Kagame said he was shocked by the high number of churches in Rwanda. Now, Kigali alone had about 700 churches. He described it as a mess. The president said Rwanda did not need so many houses of worship, which ideally should be found in more developed countries. He thinks there should be a few of them. But as expected, some church leaders revolted, 6 being Pentecostal pastors who protested the closure. Subsequently, they were arrested and accused of, quote, illegal meeting with bad intentions, end of quote. Now, the proposed legislation in Rwanda aims at regulating faith-based organizations separately from the civil society organizations. Some of the concerns around the many churches and mosques are that they are small Pentecostal prayer houses. Preachers could be profiting at the expense of the congregation. Now, they also say some churches are not well established. They meet in tents or houses that cannot accommodate crowds, and noise pollution from the night gatherings was a concern. Now, Rwanda is predominantly Christian nation, if you must know. The radical manner in which President Kagame dealt with the religious organizations in his country may not work right here in the country, as my panel puts it this evening. This is a debate that needs to be openly held without cards under the table. A good place to end tonight's show. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Bishop, Reverend Wakili, and of course, Maliba, for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. We'll do this next week, same place, same time. Remember, we are off air, but all of them here are still online. You can tweet them and talk to them. Good night.